More and more Chinese were being trained at Ramgarh in India and at Kunming in China. These were to become part of the Yunnan force that were to strike at the enemy from the China-Burma border across the Salween River. In northern India, the Chinese-American Composite Wing had been organized by Major General Claire Chennault for the Generalissimo. A picked group of American volunteers was instructing Chinese pilots and crews to fly the latest types of planes. At another base in India, Brigadier, later Major General Frank Merrill was training the Marauders, a force of experienced American jungle fighters sent to CBI by General Marshall. There were less than 3,000 of them. At a secret airfield in Assam, planes and gliders assembled for another American unit, the 1st Air Commando Force, sent by General Arnold. It was commanded by Colonel Philip Cochrane, known to millions as Flip Corken in Terry and the Pirates, and by Colonel John Allison, formerly of the Flying Tigers. The Allied Air Force of British and Americans in the newly formed Eastern Air Command bombed and strafed Jap strongholds. The Japs gathered reinforcements into their Burmese garrisons and airfields to meet the growing strength of the Allies. In China, the struggle continued. The reopening of the land bridge had to be accomplished. In the early part of 1944, the Supreme and Deputy Supreme Allied commanders met and laid out a plan of action for this reopening. The British Indian 14th Army in the Arakan, in order to hold the southern front more effectively, was to extend its frontier lines down the Akyab Peninsula. Simultaneously, Stilwell's Lido forces of Americans and Chinese were to speed up the Lido Road campaign with a drive on the strongholds of Mogong and Michina. To aid in this purpose, the American Marauders, led by Merrill, were placed under Stilwell. A third coordinating operation was a penetration from the air, in which Wingate's British and Indian Chindits were to be flown into the heart of Burma to land behind and cut enemy supply lines. For the fourth and last phase of the plan, the Chinese Yunnan force would strike from the China-Burma border across the mountains and jungles of the Salween River area in order to reopen the Burma Road for a juncture with the Lido Road. Now the plans were laid, and the stage set for the reopening of the Burma land bridge. The first step was taken on the Arakan front, when the 14th began its march down the Akyab Peninsula. The Army moved rapidly toward the towns of Mongdaw and Buthadong. Rows of nylon tow ropes were carefully laid out, ready for the takeoff of dozens of twin-towed gliders. Supplies of all kinds were loaded, including bulldozers and equipment for the use of the American engineers in constructing airstrips in the jungle.
March 5th, 1944. British and American forces combine in a daring operation. A glider invasion by the Chindits under British General Charles Wingate deep into Burma behind Japanese lines. American Colonel Philip Cochrane, the Flip Corken of the comic strip Terry and the Pirates, is the glider chief. He confers with Lord Louis Mountbatten, Supreme Allied Commander-in-Chief, Southeast Asia Command.
The pilots and crews gathered to hear final instruction from Colonel Cochrane.
Now, is there anything anybody doesn't know? If there is, let's get it straight now. Okay, now just before I came over here, I had our final meeting with the British ground troops that you're going to take in there tonight. And I talked to the guy that's got the red flare that you know is going to be shot off if there's too much interference with the first few gliders that land. And he tells me that that flare's in an awful deep pocket and it's going to take somebody an awful lot of fining to get at it. So, if those guys have got that kind of heart and they got that kind of guts, it's up to us to get them in there so they can do their job and get them in right. Now tonight, your whole reason for being, your whole existence is going to be jammed up into a couple minutes, and you're just going to balance it there, and it's going to take your character to bring it through. Now, nothing you've ever done before in your life means a thing. Tonight, you're going to find out you've got a soul. Good luck.
The transport stood ready for takeoff. gliders were lined up. Suddenly appeared in the sky above a plane returning from a last-minute reconnaissance flight. Something was wrong. Photos revealed that the main field was hopelessly obstructed. Tree trunks and logs had been strewn over it so that glider landings on this field were impossible. The troops waited for Cochran and Wingate to make a decision. It wasn't long in coming. Within 15 minutes, they were climbing into the gliders. An alternative strip known as Broadway was now to be the main airbase. At dusk, the first planes took off, each transport towing twin gliders. And within them, men sat silently, grimly, waiting for what lay ahead.
Of 67 gliders, only 32 will manage to land at Broadway, most of them disastrously. Jungle Broadway kills 31 men, injures another 30. But even
when the sun rose over Broadway, it revealed a field littered with wounded gliders. There were wounded men, too, and some beyond wounds. The first glider had bumped to a halt on a field rutted by buffalo bogs and elephant footprints, and strewn with large teakwood logs, hidden from the eyes of reconnaissance cameras by the tall grass. A second glider came in, then a third. They followed one another so fast that it was impossible to clear the field of obstructions and the wrecked gliders. The wounded were tended on the field. Patrols fanned out through the jungle to give protection to the small band of engineers and wounded. They buried their dead in the Burmese jungle. Their Burmese padre read the last rites, and his words mingled with the sound of bulldozers and tractors leveling the field, with the arrival that night of the first flight of transports, carrying the remainder of the airborne troops. By that afternoon, the engineers had completed their work. Broadway was open for business. That night and for 6 successive nights, RAF and American pilots of the Troop Carrier Command, led by Brigadier General William D. Old, flew back and forth between Lalagat and the jungle strip of Broadway, which became a base from which patrols of Chindits fanned out in all directions. With the arrival of RAF Spitfires and American P-51s on Broadway, air protection was made available to cover operations. But the enemy struck back. 8 days after our troops had landed, Broadway was attacked by Zeros in a series of raids. American and British planes landed and took off within close range of the Japs. The enemy succeeded in capturing the far end of the field, but were held there by Allied ground and air fighters, their wings armed with bazookas. General Wingate had paid one of his many visits to Broadway about this time. On his return flight to his base, his plane crashed in the jungle in Assam.